The first time someone steps into the Church of St. Verena, it is impossible not to feel the weight of countless eyes upon them. At first, it is subtle, a flicker in the corner of vision, a sense that the gaze of a painted figure lingers longer than it should. Visitors often shrug it off, attributing the sensation to shadows, lighting, or the imagination. But for those who stay a moment too long, the feeling intensifies, almost as if the eyes in the frescoes are alive, following every turn, every subtle shift of the body. There is no escape, no matter which way you move, the eyes meet yours, precise and unblinking. Walking down the central nave, the air itself seems heavy. The high ceilings, ornate with Baroque flourishes, cast complex shadows that merge with the painted faces. The walls are lined with panels, each a masterpiece of human expression, yet something about them unsettles the mind. Faces of saints, martyrs, and long-forgotten nobles stare from their frames, yet their eyes, strangely, track your presence. Some are wide with serenity, others narrowed in judgment, and all seem to share an unspoken secret. A subtle shiver runs down the spine, the hairs at the back of the neck rising in silent warning. Locals have whispered about it for generations. The eyes watch those who enter, they say. Tour guides speak of it in hushed tones, warning visitors not to linger too long in any one alcove. Pilgrims confess that at night, memories of the church invade their dreams. The eyes, once witnessed, are not easily forgotten, they seem to follow you beyond the walls of the sacred space, into your own private thoughts. Some describe feeling observed in their own homes afterward, as though an unseen extension of the church had followed them into the world. Psychologists might call it the gaze illusion, a trick of perspective and the human brain's sensitivity to faces. Yet, anecdotal accounts suggest something far more profound, something almost alive in the very pigment and brushwork. Visitors often recount a deep, emotional unease, a sense of being judged or watched not by a person, but by an essence captured in paint centuries ago. Children, in particular, cry or refuse to look directly at certain panels, claiming the figures whisper warnings. Adults feel dread, curiosity, or a strange compulsion to stare back, unable to turn away. It is not just the human-like eyes that disturb. Some paintings are strategically placed to capture entire movements. The gaze of one figure seems to anticipate the approach of a visitor, while another shifts subtly depending on the angle of light entering through stained glass windows. Experts in art and optical illusion have marveled at this precision, unable to fully explain the phenomenon. The effect is almost cinematic, every step through the church changes the dynamic of observation. The viewer is both the observer and the observed, caught in a silent dialogue with painted faces whose intentions remain eternally unreadable. Even the occasional skeptic cannot resist the slow crescendo of unease. A first-time visitor may smile politely at the legend, but after a few minutes, the sensation becomes undeniable. The subtle tension builds in the chest, a mixture of fascination and fear. A historian might point out stylistic techniques, the use of perspective, or the careful alignment of the frescoes. But even armed with knowledge, something primal remains, a feeling that defies explanation, something deeply human and profoundly unsettling. And so the church opens its doors, welcoming the curious and the unwary alike. As you step across the threshold, the first question that enters your mind is unavoidable: are the eyes truly watching me, or is my mind playing a cruel trick? That question lingers, unanswered, as you take your first cautious steps down the nave, the echo of your own heartbeat mingling with the silent scrutiny of painted eyes that never blink, never tire, and never let you forget that here, in this church, every gaze has a story, and every story seems to be directed at you. The sensation intensifies as you reach the center of the nave, surrounded by a panorama of staring faces. Shadows lengthen, and with the flicker of candlelight or sunlight, the painted eyes seem to shift ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly, until you begin to doubt your own perception. By the time you realize it, the feeling has taken root: you are being watched. And as the church doors close behind you, one truth becomes horrifyingly clear: the eyes of St. Verena's church are patient, observant, and merciless in their silent vigil. No matter how much you tell yourself it's impossible, the eyes are always there. The Church of St. Verena was not always the imposing, enigmatic structure it appears today. Built in the late 17th century, it rose from the ambitions of a wealthy patron whose fascination with art, religion, and secrecy would define the building's enduring mystery. Historical records indicate that the church was commissioned by Lord Alaric von Hohenberg, a man of immense influence but equally immense eccentricity. Known for his meticulous attention to detail and obsession with legacy, von Hohenberg spared no expense in constructing a place where devotion met artistry, and, perhaps, something darker. From its very inception, the church defied conventional norms. Unlike other ecclesiastical buildings of the time, which favored symmetry and overt grandeur, St. Verena was deliberately designed to disorient the visitor subtly. The ceilings soar higher than typical for the period, creating long shadows that dance across the nave. The walls are angled in ways that make even the smallest gestures feel magnified, and the placement of paintings, at eye level or just slightly above, ensures that every visitor feels perpetually observed. Art historians note that such a layout was highly unusual, and they wonder whether it was merely aesthetic innovation or a calculated psychological design. The paintings themselves were commissioned alongside the construction, intended to depict saints, biblical narratives, and local historical figures. Yet even from the earliest records, chroniclers described an uneasy life within the images. Accounts from the late 1700s speak of parishioners feeling watched by the souls of the painted, a phrase repeated in diaries, letters, and even official church correspondence. By the time the church celebrated its 50th anniversary, whispers of inexplicable occurrences were so common that guides began warning visitors, cautiously describing the sensation that the eyes follow, even when unseen. Von Hohenberg himself remains an enigmatic figure. Contemporary accounts paint a picture of a man both brilliant and unsettling. Some describe him as a visionary who wanted to create a sanctuary of contemplation, where the sacred and the artistic merged seamlessly. Others portray him as obsessive, bordering on fanatical, with rumored interests in mysticism, alchemy, and even occult practices. Letters recovered from the family estate suggest that he believed art could capture more than human likeness, that it could ensnare a fragment of the soul, a trace of consciousness preserved for eternity. Whether these ideas were metaphorical or literal is impossible to know, but they cast a long shadow over the church's origins. As decades passed, the Church of St. Verena became a place of fascination and fear. It survived wars, political upheaval, and even periods of religious reform, each era adding layers to its mythos. During the 19th century, a local historian documented a series of unusual events: parishioners who swore the eyes shifted while they prayed, candles that extinguished inexplicably when facing certain paintings, and even animals reacting violently when brought inside. These anecdotes, often dismissed as superstition, nonetheless persisted in local memory. By the early 20th century, the church was as famous for its artistic mastery as it was for the eerie reputation surrounding its interior. One particularly unsettling account from 1923 illustrates the persistent mystery. A visiting art critic, whose writings had earned him acclaim throughout Europe, entered the church intending to produce a detailed analysis of its frescoes. He reported feeling a distinct awareness that the figures in the paintings were not merely observing him but anticipating his movements. In his published journal, he wrote, "It is as though the eyes are alive, waiting for me to act, to reveal some hidden truth I cannot yet comprehend." Within weeks, his mental state deteriorated, and he withdrew from public life entirely. While no direct link was ever established between the church and his decline, locals whispered that the experience had changed him irrevocably. The architecture, the layout, the lighting, and the paintings together create an environment that is almost impossible to describe without visiting. The church was designed to manipulate perception subtly, making every step feel like a deliberate choreography orchestrated by unseen forces. From the narrow aisles that funnel attention to specific frescoes, to the way light interacts with each eye in every painting, the space evokes both awe and unease. Scholars argue that such sophistication suggests the involvement of an artistic mind deeply interested in the psychology of observation, someone who understood that art could affect more than the eye, it could touch the subconscious. By the end of the 20th century, the Church of St. Verena had cemented its reputation as a site of intrigue. Tourists, historians, and even skeptics traveled to witness the phenomenon firsthand. Despite, or perhaps because of, the unsettling legends, the church continued to draw attention, each visitor adding new accounts, memories, and interpretations. The story of its founding, intertwined with Lord von Hohenberg's obsessive vision, forms the foundation for the unsettling mystery that surrounds the painted eyes to this day. Yet even with centuries of documentation, one question remains unanswered: were the peculiarities of Saint Verena merely the product of an eccentric patron and a gifted artist, or was there a deliberate intention to create a place where art could capture something more, something that watches, remembers, and perhaps even judges those who enter? As the shadows lengthen within the ancient nave, the sense of being observed persists, and the eyes, still patient, still vigilant, remain a silent testament to the Church's enigmatic history. It is in this history, the blend of ambition, artistry, and obsession, that the first true hints of the Church's dark allure begin to emerge, a lure that will only grow stronger as we delve deeper into the legends surrounding its eyes. For centuries, the Church of St. Verena has been whispered about in hushed tones throughout the surrounding villages. It is not merely its architectural beauty or its rare frescoes that draw attention, it is the legend of the watching eyes. Locals speak of it as though it were a living entity, a consciousness embedded in the pigments and brushstrokes that refuses to rest. According to these stories, the painted figures do not merely observe, they judge, they follow, they remember. Every visitor, every pilgrim, every unwary soul who crosses the threshold becomes a participant in a silent, unending dialogue. The earliest mentions of this phenomenon appear in parish records from the late 1700s. A visiting cleric wrote that, while saying prayers before the altar, he felt a presence, an uncanny awareness that eyes from the paintings were tracking him. It was not a trick of light, he insisted in his journal. The gaze was deliberate in its patience, as if waiting for a confession that I could not yet utter. Stories like these, repeated over decades, created a folklore so potent that it became inseparable from the Church's identity. Some villagers claimed that on moonless nights, the eyes glowed faintly, following anyone foolish enough to linger after dusk. Eyewitness accounts over the centuries share strikingly similar details. One 19th-century visitor recalled walking down the main nave and feeling a cold sensation at the back of her neck. I turned, she wrote, and the eyes of Saint Veronica met mine, though I had already passed her by. I felt exposed, as if the figure knew my secrets before I did. Children were often the first to voice the inexplicable unease. Local families remember children screaming during Sunday service, insisting that the paintings were whispering warnings. Adults, at first dismissive, eventually became uneasy themselves, unable to explain the intensity of the children's fear. The legend deepened during times of turmoil. In 1914, during the outbreak of World War I, a group of soldiers sought refuge in the church. They reported feeling watched in ways that went beyond natural perception. One veteran claimed that, despite the chaos outside, the figures in the paintings seemed alive, their expressions shifting with his every movement. Another wrote in his memoir that he could not shake the sensation that the eyes were assessing his worthiness, cataloguing his fears and sins. Many of these accounts were never formally recorded, yet they persisted in oral histories, reinforcing the idea that the watching was universal and unrelenting. Even skeptics could not entirely dismiss the phenomenon. Art critics visiting in the 1920s observed the uncanny ability of the eyes to seem alive under varying light conditions, and while they attempted to rationalize it through perspective and human perception, some admitted a lingering sense of unease. A particularly famous critic wrote, "I have observed many churches in my life, but never have I felt so scrutinized by paint." These words, recorded in a private journal later discovered in the city archives, illustrate that the legend was not merely the product of local superstition, it affected anyone who entered, regardless of belief. Stories are not limited to perception alone. Accounts suggest subtle influence on behavior. Parishioners reportedly avoided certain aisles or lingered only briefly in front of particular paintings. Some claim that the gaze affected their decisions, steering them toward introspection or, in rare cases, driving them from the church in terror. Folklorists suggest that such patterns reinforce the legend, if enough people believed the eyes were active and reactive, the legend itself would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yet, the uniformity of experiences across generations and social backgrounds suggests something more profound, something that eludes conventional explanation. A few of the most chilling reports come from people who returned after long absences. One woman, who visited as a child and again decades later, described an unsettling recognition in the eyes, as if the figures recalled her first encounter. "I felt remembered," she admitted. "And I had done nothing to deserve remembrance." Another man, documenting his experience for a contemporary magazine, felt compelled to confess hidden misdeeds aloud, whispering secrets to the painted figures in a manner that felt necessary, though he could not explain why. These moments, often dismissed as emotional projection, only intensified the aura of mystery surrounding the church. The legend has grown into something almost tangible, a slow, creeping tension that permeates every corridor. Guides sometimes caution first-time visitors, hinting that the eyes are not passive, that they watch more than mere movement. And yet, for many, the allure is irresistible. Scholars, tourists, and paranormal enthusiasts travel from across the globe, each seeking a glimpse of the phenomenon. They are drawn not only to the art itself but to the living history of the watching eyes, aware that they are stepping into a centuries-old tradition of observation, judgment, and fascination. As the stories accumulate, the question becomes inevitable: how much of the legend is legend, and how much is an unbroken chain of perception that transcends centuries? Was the artist intentionally creating this sensation, or has the legend infused the paintings with an almost supernatural aura over time? Every new visitor contributes a fresh narrative, a new layer to a story that refuses to resolve itself. Each account strengthens the mythos, and each story leaves one haunting question unanswered: do the eyes merely follow, or do they remember, anticipate, and respond to every soul who dares enter? By the end of this exploration, the viewer begins to understand that the legend of the watching eyes is not simply a collection of anecdotes. It is a living, evolving story, threaded through generations, whispered in diaries, letters, and conversations. It is a tale that merges artistry, psychology, and something undefinable, something that defies explanation but insists upon attention. The church itself becomes more than stone and paint, it transforms into a witness, a recorder, a silent observer of human presence across centuries, waiting for the next visitor to step inside and become a part of its unsettling history. The true enigma of the Church of St. Verena lies not only in the eyes that follow every visitor but in the mind that conceived them. The artist responsible for these works is as mysterious as the phenomenon itself, a figure whose life seems deliberately shrouded in secrecy, leaving behind only whispers, fragmented letters, and the indelible mark of his genius. Known in historical records simply as Matthew Leclerc, he was commissioned by Lord Alaric von Hohenberg in the late 1600s to decorate the church's interior. Beyond that, almost everything about him is open to speculation. Leclerc was reputedly a prodigy. From an early age, he demonstrated a rare mastery over perspective, anatomy, and the subtleties of human emotion. His contemporaries wrote of his ability to capture not just likeness but essence, the invisible currents of thought and feeling that animate a face. But genius often comes with instability. Letters from his apprentices hint at a man consumed by obsession, meticulous to the point of madness. He was known to vanish for days or weeks at a time, sequestered in his studio, muttering to himself over the alignment of eyes and shadows. Some of his surviving notes suggest that he believed art could immortalize more than physical form, it could capture a fragment of consciousness, a trace of the observer's soul. Accounts of Leclerc's personality vary. Some recall him as charismatic, almost magnetic, capable of inspiring awe in those around him. Others describe a man deeply unsettling, prone to sudden bursts of anger, and often eerily silent in the presence of others. A letter from one patron reveals discomfort with the intensity of his gaze, writing that he looked at you not as an artist studies a subject, but as if he could peer through your very thoughts. Such impressions fuel the lingering question: could someone with this level of psychological acuity and obsession truly embed an effect in his work so powerful it transcends centuries? The process of painting the church is itself an indication of Leclerc's extraordinary, and perhaps unsettling, methods. Diaries from apprentices and surviving correspondence suggest that he worked obsessively on eyes, spending weeks on a single figure's gaze, adjusting minute details in curvature, color, and angle. Leclerc meticulously studied how light would fall across the church at different times of day, how the position of a candle or the sun's movement through stained glass would alter the perception of the eyes. Some historians believe he was experimenting with what could be described as an early form of psychological manipulation through visual art. Every glance, every flicker of emotion, was intentionally designed to evoke a response from anyone who dared meet the gaze. Yet, Leclerc's obsession was not merely technical, it was deeply personal. Some of his writings suggest a fixation on mortality, legacy, and control. In one fragment, he mused, "To paint an eye is to capture its witness. The witness endures beyond flesh, beyond time, and those who look shall be seen long after they themselves have departed." The passage is cryptic, but its implications are chilling. Was Leclerc attempting to create a mechanism to preserve human consciousness, or was he simply projecting his own desire for immortality into the art? The line between brilliance and madness grows impossibly thin. Stories persist of the artist's behavior during the painting of Saint Verena. One account describes a night when he reportedly locked himself in the church and emerged at dawn with eyes so lifelike they frightened even the clergy. Another tale claims that he worked only by candlelight for weeks, believing that shadows gave the eyes a living memory. Apprentices later confessed that Leclerc would become furious if anyone entered his workspace uninvited, shouting that the eyes must not witness interference. These anecdotes, though partly anecdotal, suggest an intensity bordering on the obsessive and even the ritualistic. Leclerc's own life ended abruptly and mysteriously. Some reports say he disappeared shortly after completing the frescoes, leaving behind unfinished sketches and a small collection of cryptic notes. Others claim he died under unknown circumstances, his body found near the church in a manner that defied explanation. Whatever the truth, the absence of the artist only intensified the mythos surrounding the church. Without Leclerc present to explain his intentions, generations of visitors have been left to grapple with the effect of his work, trying to discern whether the phenomenon is intentional, supernatural, or some combination of the two. Modern art historians remain divided. Some argue that Leclerc's work is a masterpiece of perspective, a manipulation of line and shadow that creates the illusion of following eyes. Others contend that the consistency and emotional intensity of the effect cannot be purely accidental. Experiments with lighting, visitor movement, and eye-tracking technology have suggested that the experience of being watched is remarkably uniform, even for strangers unfamiliar with the legend. While science may explain some of the mechanics, it cannot fully account for the emotional resonance, the visceral sensation of being observed by something more than paint. What remains indisputable is the lasting impact of Leclerc's vision. The eyes he painted continue to captivate, unsettle, and haunt those who enter Saint Verena. He crafted not merely images, but a living atmosphere, a space where perception itself becomes the medium of his art. The deeper one studies the church, the more evident it becomes that the artist's intention, whether conscious or subconscious, was to create a dialogue between the observer and the observed, a dialogue that endures centuries later. And yet, a question lingers like a shadow in every corner of the nave: was Mathieu Leclerc merely a genius, a master of perspective and psychology, or was there something else in his work, a deliberate infusion of life, of memory, of consciousness, that transforms every painting into a silent witness? As we move deeper into the Church's mysteries, this question becomes central, guiding every encounter, every revelation, and every haunting story yet to come. In the eyes of Leclerc's creation, it seems that time has no hold, and every visitor, knowingly or not, becomes part of the artist's enduring legacy. The Church of St. Verena is not merely a repository of art, it is a theater of the uncanny, a place where ordinary life and the inexplicable intersect. Over the centuries, countless visitors, parishioners, and historians have reported experiences that defy conventional explanation. These incidents are varied in nature, some subtle, some terrifying, but each contributes to the building's reputation as a site where reality seems to bend beneath the weight of unseen observation. One of the earliest documented cases comes from the late 18th century. A parish priest, Father Anselm, reported that during evening prayers, he felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, as though a presence had entered behind him. When he turned, no one was there. Yet, he insisted, the eyes of the painted saints seemed sharper, more alert, as if they had shifted focus onto him. Days later, he experienced vivid dreams in which the eyes followed him beyond the church walls, observing his daily routines. He confessed in his journal that he began to avoid long periods in the nave, fearing the watchful gaze. Throughout the 19th century, similar accounts emerged. A visiting scholar named Elodie Martel described walking through the church and feeling an inexplicable pressure on her chest. The longer I looked at a single painting, she wrote, the heavier the sensation became, as though the figure's awareness was demanding something from me, an acknowledgement, a confession, perhaps even obedience. After she left, she recorded a pattern of unease that persisted for weeks. Shadows seemed to move at the corners of her vision, and she found herself thinking of the church constantly. Not all experiences were subtle or psychological. In 1927, a group of schoolchildren visiting St. Verena became hysterical. One boy claimed that the eyes of a painting of St. Catherine had whispered to him, warning of an unseen danger. Other children corroborated that the figures seemed to shift in posture when no one else was observing. The teachers struggled to rationalize the panic, attributing it to youthful imagination, yet several parents later reported that the children continued to speak of the church with fear and fascination long after the visit. Even adults are not immune. In 1963, a historian conducting research in the church experienced a series of inexplicable events over the course of 3 days. Candles extinguished without cause, faint whispering was reported when no one else was present, and certain frescoes appeared to be tracking his movements. In his personal notes, he wrote, "I cannot deny the sense of being observed. The eyes follow with intent, almost as if they are alive, as if the figures themselves demand that I pay attention, that I remember what I have seen." Afterward, the historian refused to spend any further time in the church, but his documentation remains a cornerstone in the study of St. Verena's phenomenon. Some incidents are terrifying in their immediacy. In 1989, a modern visitor reported being physically affected by the paintings. While standing in the central nave, he felt an oppressive weight on his shoulders and a sudden, uncontrollable dizziness. When he attempted to leave, he claimed that the eyes of every figure seemed to block his path, their gaze anchoring him in place. Security footage confirmed that he had been standing still for an unusually long period, but could not explain the sensation he described. Local guides recount this incident with a mix of skepticism and solemnity, acknowledging that the church has a way of creating experiences that defy ordinary understanding. Even animals seem to respond. Stories abound of cats, dogs, and birds refusing to enter certain sections of the church. One parishioner in 2005 brought his dog inside and claimed the animal growled and shivered before fleeing, despite having been calm outside. Scholars who study human-animal perception suggest that animals may be attuned to subtle cues humans cannot detect, lending a layer of eerie plausibility to the tales. These repeated patterns, spanning centuries, generations, and even species, compound the aura of the church as a place where normal rules of perception falter. Modern visitors often echo historical accounts. Tourists equipped with cameras and smartphones frequently report capturing photographs where the eyes of the paintings appear to shift, glow, or follow movements in ways not possible under normal perspective. While some dismiss these images as optical illusions or camera artifacts, the consistency and volume of such reports make it difficult to attribute every occurrence to chance. In fact, some seasoned researchers have expressed unease themselves, unable to fully rationalize the cumulative effect of repeated observations. The psychological impact of these incidents cannot be overstated. Many who visit St. Verena describe a growing compulsion to maintain eye contact with the paintings. A local guide notes that some visitors become uncomfortable if they break the gaze, as if doing so would invoke disapproval or even danger. There are accounts of individuals speaking aloud to the paintings, whispering confessions, requests, or apologies, often in hushed, nervous tones. Even those who initially scoffed at the legend find themselves emotionally affected, caught in a subtle web of tension and unease that seems to emanate from the church itself. And yet, it is not all fear. Many visitors are captivated by the experience, drawn to the church again and again despite, or because of, the unsettling incidents. There is a strange allure in being observed by something that seems both human and beyond comprehension. The paintings become more than art, they are mirrors, reflecting not just one's physical presence but one's emotions, thoughts, and perhaps subconscious fears. This duality, fear and fascination, ensures that St. Verena leaves a lasting impression on anyone who enters. The accumulation of incidents over centuries paints a complex picture. The church is a site of subtle terror, of fascination, and of mystery. Each account reinforces the central question that has haunted visitors for generations: is this a trick of perspective, a manipulation of psychology, or something genuinely inexplicable? Every story adds a layer of tension, building an environment in which human curiosity and fear intersect in profound ways. By the end of the day, one undeniable truth emerges: the Church of St. Verena is alive in its own peculiar way. It listens, observes, and leaves an indelible mark on every soul who enters. The unsettling incidents, subtle or overt, psychological or physical, are not anomalies, they are the very essence of the Church, evidence of a carefully crafted experience that transcends centuries. Each visitor, knowingly or not, becomes a part of this living legend, adding another chapter to the story of the eyes that follow, the eyes that judge, and the eyes that never close. As the shadows stretch across the nave and candlelight flickers over centuries-old frescoes, one cannot help but wonder, what will the eyes reveal about you? For centuries, explanations for the unsettling phenomenon at the Church of St. Verena were steeped in folklore, superstition, and whispered tales. But as the modern era brought scientific inquiry and technological advances, researchers began to approach the church with a mix of skepticism, curiosity, and apprehension. What was it about the paintings that made so many feel watched, unsettled, or compelled to confess to figures of pigment and canvas? Could centuries of stories be the product of human imagination, or was there an objective phenomenon at work? The first formal investigation occurred in the 1970s when a team of psychologists and art historians arrived to study the painting's effect on visitors. Their initial goal was modest: determine whether the following eyes were simply a visual illusion created by perspective and light. Preliminary findings did indicate that the composition of the frescoes, the curvature of the church walls, and the strategic placement of eyes could create a subtle sense of movement. Shadows shifted as visitors moved, making it appear as though the figures were tracking observers. Yet, the researchers quickly realized that the effect could not be fully explained by optical mechanics alone. More intriguing were the psychological responses documented during these studies. Volunteers who entered the church for short periods often reported sensations of being observed, even when their attention was directed elsewhere. Heart rates increased, hands trembled slightly, and some individuals displayed visible signs of anxiety. Long-term visitors reported lingering unease that persisted for days, suggesting a cognitive or emotional imprint left by exposure to the environment. Dr. Helena Martins, a psychologist leading the study, remarked in her notes, "The phenomenon is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet profoundly effective. Something about the combination of imagery, architecture, and expectation triggers a deeply human response." Advancements in eye-tracking technology in the 1990s added a new layer to the investigation. Cameras and sensors recorded visitors' gaze as they moved through the nave. The results were startling. Regardless of where individuals positioned themselves, their eyes consistently aligned with the painted figures. When a person moved from one section of the church to another, their attention instinctively returned to the eyes of the frescoes, even if the figures were partially obscured or dimly lit. The data suggested that the gaze illusion was remarkably consistent across subjects, ages, and backgrounds, hinting at a universal cognitive response rather than mere suggestion or superstition. Yet, even these sophisticated studies could not fully explain the depth of reported experiences. Volunteers frequently described a sense of intentionality behind the painted eyes, as if the figures were reacting to them personally, evaluating their presence, or even judging their thoughts. Some reported feeling compelled to speak aloud, whisper confessions or apologies to the images, a behavior that puzzled researchers untrained in the phenomenon of art-induced psychological immersion. Dr. Martins and her colleagues speculated that the combination of highly realistic expression, environmental control, and cultural expectation created a feedback loop that intensified emotional reactions. Still, the intensity experienced by so many could not be neatly quantified. Paranormal investigators and folklorists also became involved, drawn by decades of anecdotal reports that suggested the eyes might not merely be optical or psychological phenomena. Using infrared cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and audio recorders, they sought evidence of supernatural activity. Some investigators reported detecting faint temperature fluctuations and unusual energy patterns near certain paintings, although these measurements were often inconsistent. Skeptics argued that these anomalies were likely the result of environmental factors, drafts, humidity changes, or electrical interference, but the sheer number of accounts, both historical and modern, made dismissal difficult. In 2012, a multidisciplinary research team brought together neurologists, psychologists, and art experts to study the church using modern neuroimaging techniques and virtual reality simulations. Participants wearing VR headsets were exposed to digital reproductions of the frescoes under controlled conditions. While some of the visual illusion persisted in VR, the emotional and physiological responses were notably weaker compared to being in the actual space. This suggested that there was something about the physical environment, the combination of light, scale, texture, and atmosphere, that amplified the experience, making it far more compelling than any visual approximation could achieve. Researchers also noted a curious phenomenon: repeat visitors often reported heightened effects the second or third time they entered the church. Memories, expectations, and previous emotional responses appeared to prime individuals to feel observed more acutely. This insight added a layer of complexity to understanding etched. Verena, it was not merely a static experience but a dynamic interaction between the observer and the environment. Each new visit became both a test and a narrative, a dialogue between human perception and centuries-old artistry. Despite the scientific insights, no investigation has been able to fully resolve the central mystery: the eyes feel alive. They provoke instinctive reactions of awe, anxiety, and self-awareness. Some volunteers admitted to feeling guilt, shame, or moral evaluation, as though their innermost thoughts were exposed. Others reported intense curiosity or fascination, compelled to study the paintings in meticulous detail, tracing every brushstroke, angle, and shadow. The psychological grip of Saint Verena transcends rational explanation, leaving both participants and investigators unsettled and deeply aware of their own vulnerability to the phenomenon. The tension in scientific study is heightened by the Church's history and the artist's legacy. Matthew Leclerc's writings suggest an understanding of human perception that borders on the prescient, anticipating modern concepts of cognitive psychology and behavioral response. The combination of architectural design, the meticulous positioning of eyes, and the subtle play of light creates a uniquely immersive environment. Researchers agree that the phenomenon is likely a combination of visual perception, cognitive bias, and environmental cues, but even that conclusion cannot capture the haunting, visceral sensation reported by countless witnesses across centuries. In the end, the scientific investigation confirms both the plausibility and the paradox of Saint Verena. The eyes do follow, and the experience is both measurable and profoundly emotional. But the sense of intentionality, the feeling that the figures observe with purpose, even with judgment, remains elusive. No camera, sensor, or brain scan can fully explain why centuries of visitors have shared eerily similar accounts of the painting's gaze. It is as though the church itself, or the artist who created it, has engineered an effect that straddles the line between reality and perception, science and legend, awe and terror. As visitors continue to enter, researchers leave with more questions than answers. Every new experiment, every new observation, only deepens the mystery. The Church of Saint Verena, it seems, is a place where the intersection of art, psychology, and perhaps something beyond human comprehension continues to challenge understanding, and to ensure that anyone who crosses its threshold becomes part of a centuries-old story that refuses to be fully explained. The eyes are observed. The eyes respond. And the eyes never stop watching. As the centuries-old shadows of the Church of St. Verena deepened, so too did the mysteries it held within its walls. Beyond the polished frescoes, the careful alignment of eyes, and the chilling stories of visitors, lay secrets that had remained hidden from the world, until a recent discovery unearthed them. Scholars, historians, and investigators combing through the church's archives stumbled upon documents, sketches, and correspondences that revealed a far darker dimension of the church's history, one that suggested that the watching eyes were more than mere artistry, they were a carefully orchestrated conduit to something almost unimaginable. The first hints came when a historian uncovered a sealed chamber behind the altar. For centuries, it had remained concealed, its entrance cleverly disguised within the ornate woodwork. Inside, the room was small, dimly lit, and suffused with the faint scent of aged parchment and candle wax. Dust-covered ledgers, sketchbooks, and bundles of letters filled the shelves, each artifact carrying the weight of centuries of secrecy. Among the papers were meticulously detailed drawings of the frescoes, annotated with cryptic symbols, measurements, and philosophical musings. The handwriting, unmistakably Matthew Leclerc's, revealed intentions that modern scholars are only beginning to understand. Some of the notes describe what Leclerc called the eternal gaze. He wrote that the eyes must serve as silent sentinels, recording not only the presence of visitors but their emotions, their sins, and their thoughts. In one passage, he claimed that certain combinations of light, shadow, and perspective could capture a memory, imprint a soul, and preserve it beyond death. While the language may sound poetic, the implications are chilling. Leclerc may have attempted to transcend the natural limitations of art, creating a mechanism for perpetual observation and documentation of human consciousness. The archives also contained coded letters to Lord Alaric von Hohenberg, the church's patron. These letters hinted at practices that, while cloaked in allegory, suggest that the construction of the church was tied to rituals that combined artistry with symbolic mysticism. One letter, for instance, describes a ceremony of alignment, conducted during the final phase of painting, where the placement of each eye was calculated in relation to celestial events. The language suggests an intention to harness cosmic timing to imbue the paintings with qualities that went beyond human understanding. Was this purely artistic philosophy, or a deliberate attempt to manipulate forces unknown? The documents do not clarify, leaving the question open, and deeply unsettling. Among the sketches, researchers discovered diagrams resembling early forms of optical traps. Leclerc mapped the angles of light and viewer movement to an astonishing degree of precision, indicating that every step, every glance, and every shift of candlelight was part of an intricate system. Some scholars have compared these calculations to modern studies in behavioral psychology, noting that the designs could provoke subconscious reactions in anyone walking through the nave. But unlike purely scientific applications, these mechanisms are interwoven with the church's artistic and spiritual elements, creating a synthesis of aesthetic beauty and psychological intensity that borders on the uncanny. The letters also hint at a personal obsession with morality and judgment. Leclerc frequently referred to visitors as subjects, and to the church as a mirror of the soul. In some entries, he appeared to delight in the idea that the eyes could detect hidden guilt, fear, or desire. "They shall witness truth unspoken," he wrote, "and no man may enter without his essence reflected back in the vigilance of my gaze." These passages suggest a level of intentionality that borders on disturbing, a desire not only to create lifelike images but to record, evaluate, and influence the inner workings of human consciousness. Further evidence emerged in the form of annotations indicating hidden symbols embedded within the paintings themselves. Some appear as geometric shapes concealed in robes or halos, others are subtle marks within the pupils of the eyes. For years, scholars dismissed these as mere artistic flourish, but the discovery of Leclerc's notes suggests they were deliberate, perhaps functioning as keys to understanding the church's deeper purpose. Certain symbols appear repeatedly in relation to the eyes, implying that they were designed to reinforce the sense of being watched, or perhaps even to encode information from observers onto the very canvas of the frescoes. Even more unsettling were references to witnessed souls in Leclerc's journals. He describes a belief that the eyes could, over time, absorb fragments of human experience, emotions, secrets, fears, and confessions, embedding them permanently within the painting. While modern researchers approach such statements with caution, the consistent reports from visitors over centuries lend an eerie plausibility. Could the experiences of those who felt observed, judged, or compelled to confess, in some way be connected to the artist's intentions? Was it merely a brilliant manipulation of perception, or did Leclerc design the church to act as a repository for human consciousness itself? Physical exploration of the church revealed additional mechanisms that reinforced the effect. Hidden alcoves, angled mirrors, and subtle variations in fresco depth were strategically placed to control perspective and light. Certain frescoes appeared to shift depending on the angle from which they were viewed, creating a subtle sense of motion in the eyes themselves. These design elements, previously unnoticed, suggest a deliberate orchestration of perception at a level of complexity rare for the period. The combination of artistic skill, architectural insight, and possible ritualistic intention underscores that St. Verena was more than a church, it was an engineered experience, a psychological labyrinth designed to unsettle, captivate, and perhaps even alter those who entered. While some historians argue that Leclerc's intentions were symbolic, spiritual, or psychological, the cumulative evidence paints a picture of calculated obsession. His notes, sketches, and correspondence reveal a mind intent on transcending the limits of art, perception, and perhaps even mortality. The church becomes a living archive, a silent witness to every visitor who passes through, and the paintings themselves transform from static depictions into active participants in the human drama unfolding beneath them. The discovery of these dark secrets elevates the Church of St. Verena from an unsettling curiosity to a site of profound mystery. It explains, at least in part, the enduring reports of being watched, judged, and psychologically affected. The eyes, meticulously designed and carefully orchestrated, are no longer simply a visual illusion, they are part of an elaborate system intended to evoke reaction, imprint memory, and provoke fear and fascination alike. The church becomes both a work of art and a psychological experiment, spanning centuries and ensnaring anyone who steps across its threshold. And yet, despite the uncovering of these archives and secrets, the full scope of Leclerc's intentions remains beyond comprehension. Were these mechanisms purely psychological, clever manipulations of perception, or did they serve a deeper, unknowable purpose? Does the church merely reflect human fear and fascination, or is it, as Leclerc's notes suggest, a vessel for something far more profound? The questions linger, unanswered, as visitors continue to enter the church, unaware of the complex network of artistry, psychology, and hidden design that surrounds them. As the light flickers over centuries-old frescoes and the hidden symbols cast subtle shadows across the walls, one cannot shake the sense that St. Verena is no longer simply a church, it is a living enigma, and the eyes within it are patient, deliberate, and always watching. For anyone who has stepped into the Church of St. Verena, the experience is rarely forgettable. While historians, psychologists, and investigators analyze its effects, it is the visitors themselves who provide the most visceral evidence of the Church's extraordinary influence. Their testimonies, spanning decades, reveal a spectrum of reactions, some leave terrified, others awestruck, and many in a state somewhere between the two, caught in a lingering tension that refuses to dissipate. One visitor, a young woman named Clara, recounted her first encounter with the church at age 21. She described entering the nave and immediately feeling seen in a way that defied explanation. It wasn't just the eyes, she explained. It was the intensity of attention. I felt like my thoughts were being read, my emotions mirrored back at me. I couldn't turn away, and yet I was terrified to keep looking. Clara's account, like so many others, highlights the duality of fascination and fear, a magnetic pull toward the paintings even as instinct urges retreat. A family visiting in the early 2000s shared a similar experience. The parents observed their children staring intently at the frescoes, whispering to each other about what the eyes seemed to be saying. We tried to rationalize it, the father said, but every step we took, every turn we made, it felt as though the paintings anticipated our movement. The eyes tracked us relentlessly. It was exhilarating and deeply unsettling at the same time. Their narrative underscores a recurring theme, the phenomenon affects both the mind and the body, compelling interaction with the artwork whether one wishes it or not. Artists and photographers visiting St. Verena often describe a strange compulsion to document every detail, capturing angles, lighting, and expressions with painstaking care. One photographer admitted spending hours trying to frame the eyes in his lens, only to find that in the resulting images, the gaze seemed sharper, more focused, as if responding to the camera. "It's as if the eyes are aware of being observed themselves," he said. "You can't capture them without feeling the weight of their scrutiny." These accounts suggest a layered awareness. The observer observes, but the observed seems conscious as well, creating an uncanny feedback loop. Tourists from around the world have left written testimonies in guest books, describing a variety of phenomena: sudden chills, a sense of foreboding, compulsive attention to particular figures, and even whispered confessions. One visitor confessed, "I found myself apologizing to a saint I had never prayed to before, simply because it felt necessary. I cannot explain why, but I felt compelled. And when I left, I carried that compulsion with me for days." Another described feeling that the eyes remembered him, that returning even years later would trigger recognition. Such reports hint at a continuity of experience, a sense that the Church does not merely observe but retains a trace of those who enter. Some testimonies are darker, bordering on fear-induced hallucination. A man in the 1990s described entering late in the evening, when the church was nearly empty. He recounted seeing shadows flicker unnaturally across the frescoes and hearing whispers that seemed to emanate from the painted figures themselves. "I don't know if it was real," he admitted, "but I could feel my secrets, my fears, being watched, judged, and perhaps recorded." While skeptics might dismiss these experiences as the mind's response to suggestion or architecture, the consistency of such accounts across decades, cultures, and age groups makes the pattern impossible to ignore. Even those who initially approached the church with skepticism often find themselves affected. A journalist covering the church for a European magazine noted that while he expected to encounter a clever optical illusion, he was unprepared for the emotional and psychological intensity of the experience. "It starts subtle," he wrote, "a glance here, a shift there, but after a few minutes, the sense of observation is inescapable. You feel exposed, yet compelled to continue. You are both terrified and enthralled. The eyes do not merely follow, they insinuate themselves into your consciousness." Many visitors report a physical response to the experience, an involuntary shiver, a tightening in the chest, or a sense of vertigo as though gravity itself were shifting. Children, in particular, seem unusually sensitive. Accounts frequently describe them staring wide-eyed, refusing to speak, or fleeing the church entirely. Adults often report anxiety, fascination, or both, illustrating the universality of the phenomenon. Whether born of psychological suggestion, architectural mastery, or something inexplicable, the church elicits a consistent, intense reaction. Notably, some visitors describe a compulsion to revisit. One woman confessed she returned 3 times in a single month, unable to resist the magnetic pull of the paintings. "It's terrifying," she said, "and yet I can't stay away. Every visit reveals something new. The eyes seem to remember me, and each time I return, I notice details I had missed before. It's like the church is alive, learning, and growing with me." Her experience captures the enduring fascination that makes St. Verena more than a mere tourist site. It is an interactive, evolving encounter that persists in memory long after visitors leave. Some scholars speculate that the combination of artistry, architecture, and human psychology produces a unique phenomenon, a psychological imprint amplified by expectation and cultural lore. However, the visitor testimonies suggest that the church's influence may extend beyond rational explanation. When hundreds of accounts across centuries align so closely in describing observation, compulsion, and emotional intensity, the effect becomes a shared human experience, one that transcends individual perception. Ultimately, the visitors' testimonies create a vivid narrative that bridges history, art, and psychology. They provide a human lens through which the enigma of St. Verena can be felt, not just analyzed. The stories reveal the emotional resonance of the church, the almost supernatural weight of its gaze, and the complex interplay between fear and fascination that ensnares anyone who steps inside. Each new visitor becomes a participant in a centuries-old continuum, adding their own experiences, emotions, and interpretations to the enduring legend. The Church of St. Verena does not merely house art. It houses witnesses, living observers and those who have been observed, bound together in a silent, timeless dialogue that continues with every person who dares enter its shadowed nave. The Church of St. Verena stands at the intersection of art, psychology, and the inexplicable. While visitor testimonies chronicle deeply personal and often unnerving experiences, researchers have sought to understand the phenomenon through both scientific and paranormal lenses. Each perspective offers insight, yet neither can fully unravel the enigma of the watching eyes. It is in this intersection that the tension, fascination, and dread of St. Verena are amplified, creating a space that defies simple explanation. From a psychological standpoint, the effects of the frescoes can be partly attributed to a combination of human perception, cognitive bias, and environmental cues. Studies in visual attention reveal that humans are naturally drawn to faces, particularly eyes. When a painting contains highly realistic eyes, our brains instinctively track their position, even if the figure is static. St. Verena's frescoes take advantage of this innate mechanism, with meticulous placement, perspective, and shading that create the illusion of movement. This aligns with the eye-tracking studies conducted in the 1990s, which demonstrated that visitors' gaze repeatedly returned to the painted eyes regardless of where they were positioned in the nave. However, psychology alone cannot fully account for the intensity and universality of the experiences. Many visitors report sensations of being judged, emotions being mirrored, or thoughts being known, which extend beyond typical visual illusions. Dr. Helena Martins, a leading psychologist who studied the church, suggested that these effects might arise from a combination of expectation, suggestion, and environmental immersion. Visitors enter the space knowing the legend, consciously or unconsciously, and this awareness primes them to notice subtle cues that amplify the sensation of being observed. Even so, the consistency of experiences over centuries suggests that something more profound may be at work. Paranormal investigators approach the phenomenon from a different angle, considering the possibility that the eyes carry a supernatural or spiritual dimension. These researchers argue that the historical records, coded notes, and the meticulous care of Mathieu Leclerc indicate an intentional attempt to imbue the paintings with qualities beyond ordinary perception. Some speculate that the church functions as a kind of psychic conduit, absorbing fragments of consciousness from its visitors. Paranormal experiments using EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and audio recorders have produced irregular readings near certain paintings, although skeptics attribute these anomalies to environmental factors such as drafts, humidity fluctuations, or wiring issues. Even so, the narratives of both historical and modern visitors lend an eerie credibility to the idea of a lingering presence. Multiple accounts describe a sense of recognition on returning to the church, as though the eyes remember those who have entered before. Children, in particular, often react instinctively, sensing a presence beyond comprehension. Animals, too, avoid specific areas of the church, reacting in ways that suggest an awareness of something imperceptible to the human eye. While these reactions can be interpreted in many ways, the cumulative effect is haunting, a place where perception, emotion, and perhaps even consciousness converge in ways that defy ordinary explanation. A particularly compelling intersection of science and legend emerges in the study of environmental factors. The church's architecture, lighting, and spatial design create conditions that heighten psychological response. High vaulted ceilings, narrow aisles, and the interplay of natural and artificial light generate shifting shadows that appear to animate the figures on the walls. The placement of frescoes along axes that catch sunlight at certain times of day creates dynamic changes in color and reflection, further enhancing the illusion that the eyes follow the observer. Even the texture of the paint and the subtle curvature of walls contribute to a sense of movement and presence. Beyond visual and environmental factors, researchers have begun exploring the potential role of the subconscious mind. The eyes in the frescoes are crafted with remarkable attention to detail, capturing expressions that evoke empathy, guilt, or moral awareness. Visitors often report feelings of shame, anxiety, or introspection, as though the paintings are reflecting hidden thoughts back at them. This psychological mirroring could be amplified by the Church's history and the pervasive legends that surround it. Awareness of these narratives primes the brain to interpret visual cues in a heightened, almost hallucinatory manner, creating an experience that is simultaneously rational and inexplicable. Yet the paranormal perspective remains compelling, particularly when one considers the meticulous notes of Leclerc. The artist's sketches, coded symbols, and writing suggest an intentional attempt to imbue the paintings with qualities beyond aesthetic or psychological effect. References to capturing memory and preserving souls imply a desire to create a lasting record of human presence, a notion that bridges folklore, spirituality, and perhaps even the supernatural. Whether metaphorical or literal, these intentions add a layer of unease to the experience, hinting at a design that manipulates perception, emotion, and belief simultaneously. Modern analyses have also explored the interplay between expectation and perception. Visitors who arrive knowing the legend report stronger reactions, while those unaware often experience subtle, yet still noticeable, sensations. This suggests a complex interaction between human cognition and environmental design. The Church's effect is not purely passive, it actively engages the mind, amplifying subconscious fears, moral awareness, and curiosity. The result is a deeply immersive psychological experience, one that blurs the line between what is seen, what is felt, and what is imagined. Ultimately, the Church of St. Verena resists categorization. Scientific methods can quantify heart rate, eye movement, and environmental variables. Psychology can explain perception, expectation, and cognitive bias. Paranormal studies can explore unmeasured energy or consciousness. Yet no approach fully accounts for the emotional and existential intensity reported by visitors. The eyes in the frescoes appear to transcend their medium, creating an encounter that is simultaneously personal and universal, rational and inexplicable, ordinary and profoundly unsettling. As investigators debate theories, the Church continues to assert its influence. Visitors arrive, hearts pounding, eyes scanning, minds alert. They feel the presence of the watching eyes, consciously or not, and are drawn into the continuum of observation that has persisted for centuries. The experience leaves them changed, their perception of space, art, and even their own inner thoughts subtly altered. It is this enduring, unresolvable tension that makes St. Verena an object of fascination, study, and fear, a site where the ordinary rules of human perception and understanding are suspended, and where the eyes of centuries continue to follow, judge, and remember. The psychological and paranormal analyses converge on a single undeniable truth: the Church of St. Verena is more than architecture, more than fresco, more than legend. It is a living enigma, and every visitor who steps within becomes both observer and observed in a timeless, silent dialogue that refuses to end. After centuries of whispers, investigations, and eerie testimonies, the Church of St. Verena finally revealed its most profound secret. Hidden in plain sight for generations, the ultimate revelation emerged from a combination of modern technology, meticulous archival research, and an unrelenting quest to understand Mathieu Leclerc's vision. The discovery would not only illuminate the artist's extraordinary genius but also redefine the boundaries between art, perception, and consciousness. The breakthrough came when a multidisciplinary team of historians, psychologists, and technologists applied advanced imaging techniques to the frescoes. Using 3D laser scanning, multispectral photography, and digital reconstruction, they uncovered subtle underlayers in the paint that were invisible to the naked eye. Beneath the familiar images of saints and biblical figures were complex geometrical patterns, minute inscriptions, and additional eyes carefully concealed within the pupils of the main figures. Each hidden element appeared intentional, designed to interact with ambient light and human vision in ways that created the subtle sense of movement and awareness reported by visitors over centuries. What made this revelation extraordinary was not simply the hidden details but the effect they produced. Computational models suggested that the combination of these micropatterns with the curvature of the walls, the angles of light, and the human tendency to track faces could create a feedback loop between observer and painting. The eyes were not just following, they were responding. Subtle variations in the observer's position, gaze, and even emotional state appeared to influence how the paintings were perceived. The frescoes effectively adapted to their audience, creating a personalized, immersive experience that felt alive and deliberate. Historical analysis provided context for the revelation. Leclerc's notes, long dismissed as eccentric or metaphorical, were reinterpreted in light of the new findings. References to capturing essence, recording souls, and creating a perpetual gaze suddenly took on a chilling literalism. The artist had meticulously engineered the church to be an interactive psychological and perceptual device. Every brushstroke, shadow, and line was calculated not just to depict holy figures, but to elicit, measure, and record human response. It was a level of sophistication unprecedented for the 17th century, a fusion of art, science, and perhaps something bordering on the mystical. Yet the revelation extended beyond Leclerc's genius. Archival documents uncovered that Lord Alaric von Hohenberg, the church's patron, had encouraged the project with an unusual zeal, insisting on secrecy and precision. Letters indicated that the church was intended as both a place of worship and an experiment, a controlled environment where human behavior could be observed, tested, and even manipulated. It became clear that St. Verena was never meant to be a conventional sacred space. It was a living instrument of engagement, an interactive experience that merged devotion, art, and psychological inquiry. The emotional impact on modern visitors was immediate. Those who walked into the nave after the revelation reported a heightened intensity of the gaze, a profound sense of being simultaneously understood and evaluated. Tourists described feeling seen in their entirety, as if the church recognized more than their physical presence. The combination of historical knowledge, technological insight, and lived experience created a layered perception, amplifying the mystery and terror of the eyes. In essence, the revelation did not diminish the phenomenon, it made it far more potent. Even more unsettling was the discovery that the church's design incorporated principles that anticipate modern theories in cognitive science and behavioral psychology. Leclerc intuitively understood how humans respond to symmetry, light, and gaze. The placement of eyes, the angles of approach, and the interaction with architectural elements were all designed to evoke heightened awareness, emotional intensity, and even moral introspection. The effect is akin to a psychological mirror. The church reflects not only the visitor's physical presence but their inner state, creating a dialogue that transcends time. The final, and perhaps most chilling, element of the revelation was the implication that the frescoes functioned as a repository of memory. Leclerc's writings and the hidden layers of the painting suggest a deliberate attempt to record human presence, capturing not merely visual attention but fragments of experience, reaction, and emotion. While the mechanism, whether metaphorical, psychological, or supernatural, remains unknown, the concept introduces a profound question: does the church remember its visitors? Are the experiences of generations of parishioners, scholars, and tourists encoded within the eyes themselves? The notion blurs the line between art and consciousness, leaving even the most skeptical investigators unsettled. This ultimate revelation recontextualizes every prior account of the church. Stories of chilling whispers, shifting shadows, and moral introspection are no longer anomalies, they are integral to the design. The eyes do not merely follow, they interact, respond, and imprint. Visitors are participants in a centuries-old experiment, enmeshed in an experience carefully calibrated to evoke awe, fear, curiosity, and introspection. The revelation transforms the Church of St. Verena from a historical curiosity into a profound, immersive work of art and human engineering, a space where perception itself becomes part of the medium. The narrative arc of the Church, from legend to investigation to revelation, culminates in an unsettling, almost cinematic climax. Modern visitors leave with a sense of having been part of something larger than themselves, a silent dialogue that spans centuries. The emotional resonance is undeniable, fear intertwined with fascination, skepticism interlaced with wonder, awe shadowed by the sense of being scrutinized. In this way, the ultimate revelation fulfills the centuries-old promise of the Church, to engage, unsettle, and captivate anyone who crosses its threshold. As the sun sets and shadows lengthen across the nave, the eyes of St. Verena continue their silent vigil. They have witnessed history, observed generations, and responded to countless human reactions. The ultimate revelation, the hidden complexity, the adaptive gaze, and the potential for memory, ensures that the Church's mystery is no longer just a legend. It is an enduring, interactive, and profoundly human experience, one that leaves every visitor forever changed. The eyes are no longer a secret. The gaze is deliberate, intelligent, and eternal. And for anyone who dares to look, the Church of St. Verena offers a revelation that is both beautiful and terrifying, a reminder that some mysteries are designed to endure. Centuries may pass, but the Church of St. Verena continues to leave an indelible mark on those who enter its shadowed halls. Its legacy is not found in records, architecture, or even in the fame of Mathieu Leclerc's artistry alone. Instead, it resides in the lived experiences of countless visitors, the psychological and emotional impressions the paintings impart, and the persistent, silent awareness that the eyes, the eternal gaze, remain ever watchful. The Church has become more than a monument, it is a vessel of human interaction across time, a place where the boundary between observer and observed is dissolved. Modern visitors often report lingering sensations long after they leave. Some describe waking in the middle of the night, feeling the eyes upon them as though the church extends beyond its physical walls. Others recount obsessive recollection of details, noting subtle expressions, hidden symbols, and micro-patterns in the frescoes that continue to surface in their thoughts. It is as if St. Verena imprints memory, emotion, and awareness on anyone who steps inside, a haunting legacy that transcends ordinary perception. The Church has inspired artists, writers, and filmmakers who attempt to capture the ineffable experience of being observed. Painters have recreated the frescoes in their studios, only to find that the reproduced eyes lack the intensity and psychological pull of the originals. Authors who attempt to narrate the visitor experience admit that language alone fails to convey the full spectrum of awe, fear, and fascination. Even digital recreations, VR simulations, and high-definition photography fall short, reinforcing the idea that St. Verena's power lies not merely in its imagery but in the immersive, interactive environment meticulously crafted by Leclerc. Folklore continues to weave itself into the Church's legacy. Local legends speak of visitors compelled to confess secrets aloud, confess sins unburdened by a human priest, or experience revelations about their own fears, desires, and moral failings. Stories circulate of those who return years later, convinced that the eyes remember them, recognize them, and adjust the intensity of their gaze accordingly. Such accounts elevate the Church from an architectural marvel to a living, almost sentient space that interacts with the human psyche in ways science struggles to quantify. Psychologists and neuroscientists studying St. Verena emphasize the universality of its effect. The gaze of the frescoes triggers deep-seated neural mechanisms, drawing on human instincts to detect observation, social judgment, and moral scrutiny. The combination of realistic eyes, ambient lighting, and architectural precision elicits both fear and fascination, a duality that heightens memory retention and emotional engagement. Visitors' testimonies align with this understanding, reporting experiences of awe, anxiety, introspection, and wonder, sometimes all at once. In this way, the Church's legacy is as much psychological as it is artistic, bridging centuries of human experience through perception and emotion. Yet the haunting nature of St. Verena is not purely intellectual or emotional. There is a visceral, almost primal, response embedded in the experience. Some visitors describe physical reactions, the tightening of the chest, the sensation of being followed, the hair standing on end as eyes track them across the nave. Children, animals, and sensitive individuals often respond with heightened intensity, suggesting that the Church communicates not only to conscious awareness but to subconscious instincts as well. This primal layer ensures that the legacy of the Church is immediate and inescapable, leaving a mark on body, mind, and spirit alike. The cultural impact of St. Verena is equally profound. It has become a pilgrimage site for the curious, the scholarly, and the thrill-seeking alike. Tourists come not only to see the architecture or admire the frescoes but to experience firsthand the phenomenon that has been whispered about for centuries. Each visitor becomes a participant in an ongoing narrative, a story that began with Leclerc and continues with every individual who steps into the nave. The church is no longer a passive monument, it is an active, evolving testament to human perception, fear, and fascination. The legacy is also cautionary. Those who study or visit St. Verena frequently warn that the experience is not trivial. It challenges assumptions about reality, perception, and self-awareness. The church does not merely display art, it interacts with those who enter, leaving impressions that may linger for days, weeks, or even a lifetime. Some have reported compulsive reflection, obsessive recollection, or an uncanny awareness of being watched even outside the church. The haunting nature of St. Verena's legacy lies in its ability to transcend its physical space, becoming an enduring presence in the consciousness of its visitors. Perhaps most haunting of all is the continuity of the gaze. The eyes, whether literal or metaphorical, continue their silent vigil. They have witnessed centuries of human behavior, emotion, and introspection. Each visitor contributes to the accumulation of experience encoded within the church, a living archive of observation and response. Leclerc's genius, combined with centuries of human interaction, has created something more than art or architecture, a multidimensional, immersive experience that challenges understanding, evokes emotion, and endures across time. The haunting legacy of the Church of St. Verena is not easily summarized. It is a convergence of artistry, psychology, folklore, and perhaps something beyond comprehension. It leaves visitors changed, aware that observation is not merely passive, that perception is not merely subjective, and that some mysteries are designed to endure across centuries. For anyone who has entered its nave, walked beneath its vaulted ceilings, or felt the subtle, compelling gaze of its painted eyes, the church is more than a building, it is an experience, an enigma, a silent witness to the human condition. And as the candlelight flickers, casting long shadows over centuries-old frescoes, one truth remains undeniable: the Church of St. Verena watches, remembers, and endures. Its haunting legacy is eternal, and every visitor becomes part of it, whether they realize it or not.